Welcome everyone to the first Future Strong of 2021. My name's Nikki Garchea and I'm the co-founder of the global strengths-based and recruitment business and development business, Cappfinity, and I am delighted to be joined today by some special guests who are close to mine and Lindsay's hearts. We'll let them introduce themselves shortly, but as always, joined by my co-host for this series, Lindsay Pollock.
Happy New Year. Happy birthday, Nikki Garchea, with our New Year's Day birthday, as we learned in our holiday episode. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Pollock. I am a career and workplace expert and author of 4 books. My newest is coming out in March, Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. It's been like a really slow news week here in the United States, Nikki. So, not much going on, but luckily we have 2 amazing people to help guide us through the career ramifications across the world. We have a global panel today, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Bob, why don't you go first? Welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Nikki. Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Bob Atwal. I work for Skyscanner, so we are a comparison travel site. We help you with all your flights, your hotels and car rentals. So please use us if you don't. And I lead global diversity in terms of racial diversity and early careers.
Thanks, Bob. Trudy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nikki and Lindsay and Bob. It's so great to see you since I couldn't get to visit you as planned. I'm Trudy Steinfeld. I am a strategist for the Americas for Cappfinity, a company that I am incredibly passionate about. I led global career development at New York University for well over 30 years. And I also do a lot of consulting in the first-gen social mobility space for universities and nonprofits.
Thank you both. It's fantastic to have you as part of our kickoff for the new year. Lindsay and I feel like we need to tell everyone listening in that you two know each other. We are worried about facilitating you both as we go through. You're dear friends, but you have great perspectives, global perspectives that we're keen to kind of chat about. And for everyone listening in, we will follow the comments window. So if there are particular things that you want us to pose to Trudy and Bob, please share those comments. We will also follow up with a blog from today's series so that you get the themes coming out. And very much today, because it's the new year, we wanted to kick off and really just cast our mind as much as we can at these crazy times to 2021. And Bob, first of all, we were wondering if you would share 3 things that you're seeing in the wider world that you think might be impacting employers, recruiters, people listening in across 2021. What do you see as some of your predictions? I use that term lightly at these times, but what do you think might be coming up?
Yeah, well, I was looking into my crystal ball just the other night, and I think there's a few things actually. Just very quickly, I think my day job is Skyscanner, but actually I've also got a number of different hats that I wear. So I've got a non-profit organisation that I run with my colleague Tom Devlin at the University of California, Berkeley. And through that international network, it gives us access to employers and universities globally. And I think what's really becoming apparent is that this global pandemic is really asking us all very, very similar questions at different stages around the world. And I think the 3 themes that I see emerging, there's something about this hybrid model, and there's something around what does that look like in terms of equity and performance. So those of us that are present in office and those that are at home, that hybrid sort of new workplace is something that's key on people's minds. There's clearly something about well-being, and I think the 2020 pandemic lesson for me is about well-being, and I think that is really big on the agenda about not only our early career talent but ourselves. And then finally, the skills agenda and social mobility. And I think the skills agenda has shifted, not to say that things like resilience or commercial awareness and all those things that we've been talking about for many years aren't important, but actually there's going to be the ability to reskill really quickly and actually ensuring equity in terms of making sure those that need a little bit more time, particularly with imposter syndrome that they're carrying from different groups and backgrounds, is then a responsibility on our part to make sure with their well-being that we develop them correctly. So I think those are the three things for me.
That's great, Bob. Thank you for that framing. So hybrid model, well-being and skills. And Trudy, I'm sure there's a lot of crossover with the career services world. How would you frame the top issues for career services?
Yeah, and I was very excited to hear Bob express those themes, because I think we have a real opportunity, because I think for right now at this moment, the themes and needs of the employer community and the student and career services community are really coming together in a way that I don't think I've ever seen it before. So I really feel that, when I think about what are really the top three things that are important, and hopefully we can, do a deeper dive on this later, is really reinventing and reimagining career services for quality, for impact, for engagement, reaching the students who really have never really engaged. Career services models are going to be hybrid forever. And there's going to be some really important things that people are going to have to think about to bring value and continue in their roles and what they're delivering. Of course, at this time, not only in the US, but globally, the themes of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think are incredibly important. I think we have to stop giving lip service to it, and it has to be a call for action to all of us, especially on the social mobility piece, which Bob identified. And then I think that it's really important that we re-envision collaborations and partnerships in a way that we have not really done before, in terms of the kind of work we can do and what we can bring and do together is going to be much more scalable, powerful, and better use of resources in the future. So those would be my top three.
That's brilliant, Trudy. So there's also a piece around the hybrid learning. There's the diversity and inclusion, the partnership piece. It sounds as though for both of you, there's this element of mixed model. And Lindsay and I have been speaking to many global leaders in recent weeks as our research continues. And there is this growing concern about, or focus, because I think some organizations are doing better than others, but around how to crack this hybrid way of working and also how leaders navigate it. Bob, what are your thoughts on that first topic you mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of systemic, I suppose, issues we've got to deal with around that hybrid model. And I think for me, what I mean there is some of the policies, the sort of people policies that are in play in whether organizations or universities, they're really designed to basically a minority have abused them and the majority are then penalized with these policies. And so there's an element of trust that needs to be reimagined and an element of new design in these policies, because they're enablers. Because without those policies, this hybrid model isn't going to quite work. And I'm pretty sure there's people on this call or tuning in that have worked for a boss who basically is all about presenteeism. So if you're not visible, you're not working. Now, the pandemic has thrown that up in the air because productivity's gone up. But what happens when you're in the office and what happens when you choose not to go into the office? Are those that are in the office going to be more favored versus those that aren't? And so I think these policies really need looking at.
Trudy, what would you add from the career services perspective? Obviously, there are a lot of pros of the hybrid environment, but also some, potential pitfalls, as Bob mentioned. How do you think career services offices are sort of planning for this? And as you said, they've been doing it a long time, but where are the pros and where are the concerns?
Yeah, I think that for a long time, and I certainly did it when I was in the higher ed community, where we counted student contacts, and student contacts meant anyone who walked in the door, went to a presentation, had an on-campus interview. And obviously the pandemic, as Bob has said, has thrown that out the window. So I think that although there have been the gradual implementations of strategies to do things remotely or online chats, you have to meet students where they really are. And right now, even if they're at some kind of hybrid on-campus learning model, they're not really coming to your office. And so how do you really engage them? And more than that, how do you really assess what their competencies are, where they need help? Bob and I talked the other day about instilling this sense of belonging, which is particularly important for students who are disenfranchised, marginalized, represent certain groups. Now, how do you do that and make it equal or fair in a hybrid model? And one of the things that I would also add to that, because it's just really, I'm really passionate about it, is that career services for a long time was sort of thinking, we'll do the traditional resume, we'll do interview prep, we'll engage with employers because we kind of have to get our students internships and jobs, and do some other things. I think it is a real amazing opportunity at this moment to step up and say, what can we do to inform our university community or our college community on how to upskill and prepare students better so they really have more opportunities even during a pandemic? And I know I'll just put in a plug for our new product V at Cappfinity, which does exactly that, because I think we have to really, we're not telling the truth if we're not being part of the conversation of what the employer community is really looking for. That's going to lead to greater social mobility and opportunities for students.
Thanks, Trudy. And I think some of what you mentioned would actually buffer some of the negative things that I'd like to ask Bob around in terms of mental health, because I think it would have a knock-on impact, a positive impact for the students. We can see globally now, I guess, the uptake from people really struggling with mental health, healthcare professionals experiencing things globally that they've, had to do for so many months now, but also everybody's experience, I think, globally is that as we go into January, which is typically the bluest month, I think we're just past the unhappiest Monday, or we're about to go into it. People are mentioning well-being with a level of authenticity and kind of a desire to champion it. But what are you seeing, Bob? What do you think that we need to do as organizations to focus in on well-being?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we've got to understand that well-being, truly understand it in terms of dissecting it. So what does well-being actually mean? It's a snapshot in time. And actually, what's the things that actually support well-being? And you can look at it from a physical perspective, a mental perspective, a social perspective. And actually, how do you build up tactics to ensure you become resilient so that your well-being mentally, physically, socially, emotionally is managed? And I think so we've got to treat it in that way that people know where to go with each of these situations. So socially, can I use my networks to positively get some good vibes, or do I, when I know my battery's running low, is it somebody I'm going to am I going to go for a run, have a cup of tea, whatever it might be? And I think that is really important, because the well-being is going to be very different for everybody. So it's not necessarily I can go for a run and I'm going to be okay, and that you should go running too. So understanding what drives the well-being and what builds up that resiliency is really important. And I think we, as employers and as educators and vendors in this space, we've been doing this for years, and we know it works, and we've got the tactics and the techniques. We just got to make sure that we do it together. What we don't need is a new fad, because we're really playing with people's minds here and lives, and actually they need us to be collectively coordinated to help them through it.
I want to dig in on that. And Trudy, I want to go to you on this, because I know you're as passionate about it as we all are. Millennials and Gen Zs, the college students and young people today, their rates of mental health concerns are astronomical compared to previous generations. This is only getting worse with the pandemic. Bob, you started talking about really specific tactics, and there was just a great quote in the Axios newsletter by Josh Burson saying, well-being used to be kind of a nicey-nicey, and it has now crashed onto the desks of CEOs and university presidents. Trudy, what do you actually do what are some strategies or tactics that you hear about? As Bob said, it's not about have a cup of tea and go for a run. How do you really address this issue in a scalable way when you're in a leadership position?
So I want to break it down into two groups. So number one, and Bob mentioned this, your team, checking in with your team in a way that is intentional, and making time to really hear them, and not saying I want to get really in your business, in your personal life, but really just, how for so many years, I would say so many of us, and we do just say, hey, how you doing? But never really stop to listen and hear the answer. And I think we have to really, really be intentional, and then really kind of put the resources and support that people need. It's not only I'm in the US, so I'd say a cup of coffee and a run, but also what can I do to support you? And many organizations do have mental health resources, do have support, do have counseling, but this sense of belonging for teams is, I think, incredibly important. For the students, it's a larger issue. And students are feeling very isolated, even if some of them are sheltering at home with their parents. How do you check in and make it scalable? So career services, for the most part now, has the technology and some of the systems they're using to customize messages to send to students in a way that is supportive in checkout. And hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Can we be of help? Here's some resources. And by the way, we'd love to have an appointment with you. We used to actually, students who we had kind of dropped out of sight for a while, we would do that routinely. And in fact, say, we've actually gone ahead and scheduled an appointment for you at this time because we'd love to have a check-in with you. And if you can't make it, click here and we can reschedule that. And I think even for career services that are feeling stretched on resources, there's ways to do that, even with the most, really unsophisticated software. You can do that. You can make phone calls. I know some of the research you, Lindsay and Nikki, did. We found that a phone call, rather than being on Zoom or being on some big webinar, really, was appreciated. And so just even taking, breaking that up among your team and calling a number of students to kind of check in. And then the other thing I would say, there's nothing that builds self-confidence and well-being that feels like there is optimism and hope at the other end. And so many students during this pandemic think that there haven't been jobs when there actually are jobs. And giving that hope and that optimism and the support to find a path forward, I think will do a lot and go a long way.
Trudy, I think that's so spot on. And one of the things we see in the employer space is people noting if they've got someone that they're managing who is cancelling calls frequently with them, to go straight to them, not think that it's just because scheduling's off, but to use their intuition more when you can't be with people all the time. So I think the things you're mentioning there about just getting to the students rather than waiting, I think is incredibly key. Back to you for a second, and then it would be great to hear Bob's perspective as well, particularly with all of the research from Inox and the employers that you support, Bob. But from a diversity, equity and inclusion perspective, what do you think for 21 in the kind of college and campus space needs to be a focus for, I guess, the people supporting students, but also maybe those recruiting them as well?
I think that the higher ed community, who definitely talks a lot about DE&I think they have to start putting their actions, to really demonstrate that they really care. The populations, brown and black people, students with disabilities, other marginalized populations, I think you really have to lean into and really take a look at what you are doing and can you really support that. I also think you have to make sure that not only is your staff really trained to be sensitive and understand that there may be students who can't log in to something because of the digital divide. How do we support that? And I also think educating the employer community, who I know has really at this moment trying to step up, but there may be things that you are really not communicating to the employer community that they could do to really support the belonging, social mobility, and support of diverse students in a very big way that maybe they haven't been articulated quite as specifically. And I think now is the time to do that.
Thanks, Trudy. One of the things I just want to, and maybe you've both got perspectives on this, Lindsay and I before Christmas were running a section with URX in the US, and we were in a round table and somebody shared that one of the things that they were getting fed up with was people bringing a token diversity individual via the organization onto campus to say, we do diversity. And what the students in this group were saying was actually what we really appreciate is when the organization might bring a whole variety of people from every walk of life that you can't dictate the diversity by the color of their skin or their gender, that they just know that there is diversity of experience coming into the university. Any reactions to that before we pass to Bob?
I think that's completely true. I'll tell a very quick story that happened many years ago when our female student candidates were asking for what is your guidance on flexible work in the future. And it was a very large professional services firm who said, and this is how I'm going to date myself, oh, we have a brochure about that. Or the investment bank saying, nobody will really have to work on a weekend unless they're notified on a Thursday, but we don't really mean it. I think now you have to really mean it. And I think that these token efforts, this glossiness is really not going to cut it, because the authenticity, the pureness of purpose that students are looking for is really what is going to be really valued. And I think any other efforts are actually not going to go over well.
Bob, yeah. I don't know if you have any reaction, and we'll have to get into reskilling as well.
How long have we got? A couple of things. Firstly, just very quickly on the well-being piece. One of the things that has really impressed me is the organisation that I work for. But we're not alone. We have unstructured time every day, and we have done since March of last year, where if we've got care responsibilities or children needs or anything at all, if we want to go for a run, then between 1 and 4 every afternoon, we can do what we want to. And productivity's gone through the roof, but it's basically the fact that our organisation cares, and it's about those check-ins and authenticity that we talked about. So I think, there's lots of examples of that around the world. In terms of the inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging piece, I do despair a little bit, if I'm honest, and I think I can say it right. Being somebody of a background that is obviously, I'm a son of immigrants that came to the UK to rebuild the country after the Second World War, part of the Commonwealth, so from India, and actually I've seen the UK change, and I think in many ways, when we start to talk about equity, inclusion, diversity, belonging, actually there are different things at play around the world, and partly what is happening in the US right now is not necessarily what's playing out in the UK. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't had our Black Lives Matter protest and the importance of that movement, absolutely, but basically systemically the US has never really sorted that agenda out. And so if you want to do it authentically, if you want to do it properly, then you're going to have to go back to grassroots and really redefine and rescope that. But actually, if you go into South Africa, for example, there's a different play in situ there, with Mandela being freed, with the new country being born in 93. Mandela was released in 91, got elected in 93. Actually, the whole equity agenda in South Africa is really at play. But even then, there are issues and challenges, because you're dealing with generations of knowledge that hasn't been particularly shared with different groups. And I think the challenge with diversity, and particularly global organizations, is you try to imprint what you think is happening in your space around the world. And so there's going to be a little bit of give and take. And what I mean by that is that there are experts out there that are clearly people who are very expert in their roles, but they've also had the opportunities and the access. So how do we kind of level that playing field, and how do we kind of use that knowledge? Because it's not their fault they had some privilege, and particularly colour privilege in this instance being white. But actually, how do we take that knowledge? How do we help the ones that have got equal ability and right and can do that, or we can nurture and develop that group? And I think this is a really uncomfortable conversation that many organizations just don't want to have, or actually many governments don't really want to have, or many society, whichever political spectrum you sit in, don't want to have. The other thing that upsets me a little bit about this is there's this group of people that are antagonists in a way that what they're saying and what they're doing is calling things out, which is absolutely right, but they have no solutions to how to help deal with the situation. So for me, it's one thing calling it out, but it's another thing actually putting things in place, tactics in place, interventions in place, and making sure that what we're doing is, like, people like me are reaching back and pulling others like me through the system, and actually calling it out when it's not there. So even though I've worked in really global organizations, or I've worked in universities as well, and I've been a vendor as well, having been in all sides of our sector, there's not been enough people like me at the very senior levels, and I have to ask myself why. And I don't ever feel like I've been discriminated against. I think I've been very fortunate. People have looked out for me and mentored me, but I don't know why that hasn't occurred for others. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think this is a huge topic, and this is a topic that really needs care, it needs thought, it needs attention, but it needs tactics to kind of make sure we really truly turn the tide and turn this ship around.
Bob, what's your message to those who are brave enough to take this on, who are listening to you and saying, I want to do something, I don't want to see that future? What would you say?
I think it's really, really critical. I think, allyship is absolutely critical here, and allyship of all the protected characteristics, not just race, gender, accessibility, everything is at play, mental health. And so we have to be allies and educate our colleagues, our leaders, and our, dare I say it, youth coming through. When I'm giving my age away, but I've got a couple of Gen Zs of my own, and as they're coming through, I think I've got a responsibility to try and help them, to make them understand and the world that I want it to be, that they want it to be, that they deserve it to be. And I think the allyship piece is really important, and that doesn't mean you're not going to hit walls or barriers, but actually, how do you use your intellect to get around those walls and barriers? How do you use your sphere of influence to do certain things? I'm conscious of time. I could carry on talking about this, but there is a project that I'm involved in, which is part of my PhD, which my PhD was on social mobility, and it's a practice-based one. And it's something that I've called the 1 Hour Project. And it's really about providing access to those that don't have it so that we can do something here.
And Bob, if we can, as part of the follow-up for this, let's put those how people can get involved with that within the blog that's coming out as well. You mentioned time. We will have to be prompt with the final two, but we often go over on this particular session. So a few minutes, people will forgive us, and we know people, it's recorded, so people will dial in. Would you just give us a piece before we go back to True on Partnerships on your thoughts on upskilling? And we will also pose upskilling to Manny, who will be on next week. So we will definitely continue this topic.
The skills agenda, I think, is really important. And I think, you know this better than most in terms of Cappfinity, and particularly you, Nikki, in terms of the assessment agenda. I think we've got so hung up on creating this process of how we select people that we actually forget, do they really understand the skill at play and the strength of that skill that they have? And I think we really do need to focus on that agenda around how they turn those skills into strengths, and then how you reskill continually. Because the rebuilding of the economies around the world is going to require different skills, different strengths at different moments in time. And I think our focus needs to be there. So anyone who goes back into their organization who's responsible for early careers, you've got to ask yourself the question, is my program still fit for purpose in terms of helping this organization through what is going to be, hopefully, our roaring 20s being repeated? And out of the roaring 20s, the first time round, where they were called the lost generation, came some of the world's best literates and some of the world's best books. So there is always an upside, back to True's point around hope. And we've got to have faith and hope that things will get better. And I think that skilling agenda is so important to get to that place.
Trudy, I'd love for you to weigh in on that. I mean, it would seem obvious that higher education would be involved in the reskilling agenda, but it seems to be falling to corporations more. What's your perspective on the reskilling conversation?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And if you really want to serve students, especially students who have been historically marginalized or overlooked, then it is actually somewhat criminal to not really be vocal about what are the skills and strengths that employers really are looking for today and what are they looking for the future. And organizations in higher education have been slow because you have faculty who are tenured and this is what I'm teaching. The interesting thing is, and I've done some of this work actually with the City University of New York, is creating a template to match the variety of things that faculty are already doing in the classroom and mapping their pedagogy to actual skills and strengths that map incredibly well. Collaboration. So when you give a team project, for example, or learning agility, or resilience that Bob mentioned earlier, I think there's a way to really inform the communities at your institutions that you're doing a disservice to the students by not preparing them. And it's not like there has to be this incredible shift in what they're teaching in all subject matters in the sciences, the social sciences and humanities. It is how you speak about it, giving students the vocabulary and the language to really tell their story effectively. And one other thing, because Nikki, you had mentioned about partnerships that I think is really important. If you take this holistic look and you collaborate, not only with people at your institution and their departments, but you think about, I was at NYU. I always thought, I want to have more students recruited than what goes on up north at Columbia. But how can local schools band together? Because everyone's budget is going to be stretched. The employer recruiting budget, the university recruiting career development budget. So how can we get more people together, scale it, and really support these students? So I think really interesting partnerships in a way that help really reach more students and help really support what employers are trying to do is the way to go.
Can I jump in on one thing you said that I think is such an important point to call out? When we say reskilling or upskilling, or when you say, universities are not teaching the right things, it's not that everything is wrong and we have to change 100% of it. It's mapping what we do teach and tweaking it a little. I think there's this sense that it means that we have to throw everything out and start from scratch. It's not, right? It's a rethinking, it's a reimagining. And I think that's a really important point. If you're going to reskill from one thing to the other, it doesn't mean everything you've learned so far doesn't count or isn't valuable. And Nikki, I would just love to ask you and have Bob weigh in. What are the sort of the most common areas where that happens, where someone is 80% of the way there or 90% of the way there? I just think it's such a misconception that we're starting over. Does that resonate, Bob?
I was going to say it really does. And I think, again, maybe I'm on a philosophical day today. I don't know. But universities, their raison d'etre was to progress humanity, progress society. That's why universities were set up. And they've done a really decent job for the most part for all the hundreds of years that we've had universities. And we are all recipients of their excellent work, because look at the amazing work that scientists, the epidemiologists have all got together around the world to kind of create the vaccine that's starting to be rolled out. And that is just one example of incredible roles that universities play in society. But I think actually there's this moment for universities to just stop again and think, okay, how are we going to help the next phase of our evolution and the skills agenda? So how do we take the fact that most people now in higher education, Paul Redman, who some of you will know, says going to university is modern day national service for many, many people. And so as part of going to university, and most people do it, they're all going to go into the labour market as opposed to becoming researchers. And so how do we ensure that the majority that are going into the workplace are mapped in terms of what they've learned from that pedagogy, mapped from that technical piece, and how they can apply it practically in the workplace? And I think that's the reimagining, that's the reinvention of how do we take what's already existent and how do we apply it in a practical sense.
Trudy, you've been doing this a long time. It was always sort of a joke that professors would never talk to career services, right? That, oh, that, we don't do that. Have you seen that evolve over time, or are we seeing that change?
I certainly had great success with involving faculty, and let me give you a few takeaways for that. One is, I know something that Bob and I are both very passionate about, which is first generation college students. I was able to identify 50 first generation college faculty members. And when I posed it, could they be part of our mentoring and support? They were amazingly receptive to getting it, that not everyone is going to be able to follow an academic career and be a researcher, nor do they need to be. Two, I think younger faculty who had their own challenges of supporting their PhDs and their researches and have family members. So I think there is a way to appeal to people on a very human level. And I just also think that the other thing I was very good at doing was, how do you connect the dots? If there are faculty that are really interested in certain topics, but they may not have the connections with the employer or corporate community that is interested in very similar research or work. So the professional consulting firms of the world, for instance, or some of the banks, or some of the sciences, I think showing that there is a way to collaborate and also support the kind of work that they're doing really can be very successful at getting them to hear and understand and adapt some of the ways that they're approaching this with students.
Trudy, Bob, Lindsay, thank you for what has been a really stimulating conversation. I think the people listening in are going to get so much practical thoughts and advice on how they can kind of create these partnerships, think more positively, actually, is what I take away as we think about 2021. You are both great ambassadors for this hybrid work, actually, between campus and employers and organizations. And I think if more of us could take a leaf out of both of your books, then we would certainly be taking great action in 21. So thank you so much for your contributions. Lindsay and I will be delighted next week to welcome Manny Contamanolis, who is the Associate Vice President at Northeastern, heading up employee engagement and career design. And we are definitely going to pose the upskilling conversation to
that kind of mood in the US.
Yeah. Everyone will know I can never get through one of these without doing something. Last week it was the drunken hat. So there's always one thing. That's why people have to listen to the end. But yeah, we very much look forward to taking these conversations forward. And thank you for your contributions to Future Strong today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.